I'm going to talk a little bit about the concept of being absent from Hong Kong as part of this slide here, because the two do work together in a very important way. Remember, the test for approval is continuous ordinary residence for a period of not less than 7 years where any absences from Hong Kong have been of a merely temporary nature, as evidenced by what you leave behind to return back to at the end of each stay, each temporary stay abroad. And the Immigration Department are looking for certain kinds of key anchor documents to satisfy themselves as regards your settlement and your continuity of ordinary residence. And the two critical sets of documents are, on the one hand, a continuous collection of filings of tax documents, that is, the returns that you've made to the Inland Revenue Department, either by your employer or you personally, that speak to you having been earning in Hong Kong and filing your taxes each year. Those documents are really important, as is also proof that you have maintained a home in Hong Kong throughout all of that time. And in this regard, you will either have owned property or you've been renting. And the Immigration Department would hope to see that evidence of both, not least back-to-back tenancy agreements if you've been renting throughout all of that time. Now, the problem is that not everybody keeps accurate records, and 7 years is a long time, and normally in Hong Kong, a tenancy is only going to last for 2 years, and after 3 tenancies, you're fed up with the paperwork anyway, and you throw it away, and you don't give any thought to how this would be important documentation for in the context of an immigration application subsequently. So the key thing is that if you don't have your tenancy agreement, so you haven't owned property through all this time, but you've filed your taxes, then you're kind of going to be okay, because the Immigration Department take the view that you have been laying your head on a pillow in Hong Kong every night. If you've paid your taxes, and they also check to see how much time you spent in Hong Kong throughout all of that time. And if it's clear on all the facts that you've had a residence visa, either as an investment visa or an employment visa, you've been engaged in gainful commercial activity here. If you filed your taxes, you've been obviously interacting with society in a way that's important for settlement purposes. And if they can see that you've spent a large part of your time in Hong Kong, clearly you've been sleeping somewhere here every night. So if you can't come up with a proof of tenancy agreement, that's not such a big problem. The problem is if you've spent a lot of time away from Hong Kong, because quite often you see a situation where you perhaps work for an employer for a couple of years, and the employer says, we want you to go to Singapore for a year, and you're going to have to move and live in Singapore and take your family with you. The question then is begged is, well, will that 1 year in Singapore break your continuity of ordinary residence when it comes time for the right of abode? Well, normally, depending on what you leave behind to return back to, the answer is no, as long as you can show that it was your intention at the time that you departed that you were going to depart on a merely temporary basis only. So the documentation that you deduced to the Immigration Department at that time would be a copy of your correspondence with your employer that was kind of the negotiation leading to your deployment to Hong Kong, and clearly on that evidence that it's the intention of your employer that you're going to go there temporarily, and that they are going to maintain your residence visa status here, because the intention is that you're going to come back to Hong Kong at the end of that temporary stay abroad. So you could, in fact, spend, say, for example, 12 months in those circumstances in Singapore, and still be able to argue to the Immigration Department that you didn't break your continuity of ordinary residence. Another example from our files is a case quite a few years ago now where she was owning a business and he was her dependent. And he had some health problems, and he went back to the UK for one of his regular checkups. And when he got to see his doctor, the doctor said, you're this far away from dying, so into hospital you go. So he went into hospital and he had a number of procedures, and time went on. And once he came out of hospital, he effectively couldn't travel. He couldn't get on an aircraft. And this whole scenario played itself out over the course of 2 years. And subsequently, he was able to come back to Hong Kong when his health improved. And then a few months later, we made an application for both of them for the right of abode. So the question was, given that he'd been away all of that time, more than 2 years, had he broken his continuity of ordinary residence for the purposes of his right of abode application? The short answer is no, he hadn't, because he had a dependent visa. His wife was in Hong Kong running the business. At the time that he left, he was just going to go back to the UK for a regular routine checkup. He didn't know what was going to happen to him whilst he was there, and subsequently, as soon as he was able to travel again, he got on an aircraft and flew back. So you could tell in those circumstances that it had been his intention to depart on a merely temporary basis, as evidenced by what he left behind to return back to at the end of that temporary stay abroad, which turned out to be a 2-year lengthy period. So you can have a set of circumstances where you are away from Hong Kong for quite a long time, and as long as you've got the qualifying conditions in place for the right of abode approval purposes, you will be able still to go on to argue successfully that you should be granted permanent residency in Hong Kong. The process takes about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks altogether to finalise. You can make your application 30 days before your 7-year anniversary is up, although the Immigration Department won't actually finalise the approval formalities until you've gotten across the 7-year anniversary line, so because it's hard and fast under the basic law. And the way it works is that you make your application to have your eligibility for permanent residency verified, and you submit all the paperwork. You can either do it online or you can submit the application in person on the 25th floor of the Immigration Tower, and then the Immigration Department receive all your documents, and they look at it, and if they're satisfied on the evidence that they've got before them and their own investigations as to how your life has been lived in Hong Kong, are effectively a permanent resident of Hong Kong. They then invite you in to finalise the procedure. And the finalisation is where you have a so-called interview. And the letter that you get is a little bit misleading because it says, please attend for an interview. And people, their hearts start palpitating, what's going to happen to me? But effectively, all that they're doing is they're going to inspect your original travel document for the first time, because you've submitted your paperwork online or in a bundle without any formal inspection of your travel documentation or your Hong Kong identity card. So at the verification appointment, they literally just look at your identity card and they look at you, they look through your passports, and they make sure that you as the applicant is the human being that's going to be granted the status. And if they're satisfied that you are the person in the application, then the immigration officer will then sign in front of you and verify your eligibility for the right of abode. And at that point, you become a permanent resident of Hong Kong.